On that fateful day 23 years ago, America changed forever. We saw the manifestation of evil, leaving buildings burning. That tragic day, we were truly one nation under God.
The events that happened 23 years ago brought us together as a nation. I found myself on the front lines of the hunt for those responsible for the cowardly attacks on the American public and our homeland.
Freedom cannot be taken from those who are willing to fight and die for it.
Father, I pray that today would not only be about remembering, but about looking forward.
At 8:45 a.m., a hijacked passenger jet, American Airlines Flight 11 out of Boston, Massachusetts, crashes into the North Tower of the World Trade Center, tearing a gaping hole in the building and setting it afire. At 9:03, a second hijacked airliner, United Airlines Flight 175 from Boston, crashes into the South Tower of the World Trade Center and explodes. Both buildings are burning. At 9:17, the Federal Aviation Administration shuts down all New York City airports. At 9:21, the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey orders all bridges and tunnels into the New York area closed. At 9:30, President Bush, speaking in Sarasota, Florida, says the country has suffered an apparent terrorist attack. At 9:40, the FAA halts all flight operations at U.S. airports, the first time in the U.S. history that air traffic nationwide has been halted. At 9:43, Flight 77 crashes into the Pentagon, sending up a huge plume of smoke. Evacuation begins immediately. At 9:45, the White House evacuates. At 9:57, President Bush departs from Florida. At 10:05, the South Tower of the World Trade Center collapses, plummeting onto the streets below. A massive cloud of dust and debris forms and slowly drifts away from the building. At 10:08, the Secret Service agents armed with automatic rifles are deployed into Lafayette Park across from the White House. At 10:10, a portion of the Pentagon collapses. United Airlines Flight 93, also hijacked, crashes into Somerset County, Pennsylvania, southeast of Pittsburgh. At 10:13, the United Nations building evacuates, including 4,700 people from the headquarters building and 7,000 total from UNICEF and the UN development programs. At 10:22 in Washington, the state and justice departments are evacuated along with the World Bank. At 10:24, the FAA reports that all inbound transatlantic aircraft flying into the United States are being diverted to Canada. At 10:28, the World Trade Center's North Tower collapses from the top down as if it were being peeled apart, releasing a tremendous cloud of debris and smoke. At 10:45, all federal office buildings in Washington are evacuated. Secretary of State Colin Powell cuts short his trip to Latin America to return to the United States. At 10:48, the police confirm the plane crash in Pennsylvania. At 10:53, New York's primary elections scheduled for Tuesday are postponed. 10:54, Israel evacuates all diplomatic missions. At 10:57, New York Governor George Pataki says all state government offices are closed. At 11:02, New York City Mayor Rudolph Giuliani urges New Yorkers to stay at home and orders an evacuation of the area south of Canal Street. At 11:16, CNN reports that the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention are preparing an emergency response team in a precautionary move. At 11:18, American Airlines reports it has lost 2 aircraft. American Flight 11, a Boeing 767 flying from Boston to Los Angeles, had 81 passengers and 11 crew aboard. And Flight 77, a Boeing 757, en route from Washington's Dulles International Airport to Los Angeles had 58 passengers and 6 crew members. Flight 11 had slammed into the North Tower of the World Center, and Flight 77 had hit the Pentagon. At 11:26, United Airlines reports that United Flight 93, en route from Newark, New Jersey to San Francisco, has crashed in Pennsylvania. The airline also says that it's deeply concerned about Flight 175. At 11:59, United Airlines confirms that Flight 175 from Boston to Los Angeles has crashed with 56 passengers and 9 crew members aboard. It hit the World Trade Center's South Tower. At 12:04, Los Angeles International Airport, the destination of 3 of the crashed airplanes, is evacuated. 12:15, San Francisco International Airport is evacuated and shut down. The airport was the destination of United Airlines Flight 93, which had crashed in Pennsylvania. The Immigration and Naturalization Service's U.S. borders with Canada and Mexico are on the highest state of alert, but no decision has been made on closing those borders. At 12:30, the FAA says 50 flights are in U.S. airspace, but none are reporting any problems. At 1:04, President Bush, speaking from Barksdale Air Force Base in Louisiana, says that all appropriate security measures are being taken, including putting the U.S. military on high alert worldwide. He asked for prayers for those killed or wounded in the attacks and says, make no mistake, the United States will hunt down and punish those responsible for these cowardly acts. At 1:27, a state of emergency is declared by the Washington, D.C. At 1:44, the Pentagon says 5 warships and 2 aircraft carriers will leave U.S. Naval Station in Norfolk, Virginia, to protect the East Coast from further attack and to reduce the number of ships in port. The 2 carriers, the USS George Washington and the USS John F. Kennedy, are headed for the New York coast. The other ships headed to sea are frigates and guided missile destroyers capable of shooting down any aircraft. At 1:48, President Bush leaves Barksdale Air Force Base aboard Air Force One and flies to an Air Force base in Nebraska. At 2 o'clock, senior FBI sources tell CNN they are working on the assumption that 4 airplanes that crashed were hijacked as part of a terrorist attack. At 2:30, the FAA announces there will be no U.S. commercial air traffic until noon Wednesday at the earliest. At 2:49, at a news conference, Mayor Giuliani says that the subway and bus service are partially restored in New York City. Asked about the number of people killed, Giuliani says, I don't think we want to speculate about that more than any of us can bear. At 3:55, Karen Hughes, a White House counselor, says the president is at an undisclosed location, later revealed to be Offutt Air Force Base in Nebraska, and is conducting a national security meeting by phone with Vice President Dick Cheney, National Security Advisor Condoleezza Rice, are in a secured facility at the White House, and Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld is at the Pentagon. At 3:55, Mayor Giuliani now says the number of critically injured in New York City is up to 200, with 2,100 total injuries reported. At 4 o'clock, CNN National Security Correspondent David Ensner reports that U.S. officials say there are good indications that Saudi militant Osama bin Laden is suspected of coordinating the bombings of 2 U.S. embassies in 1998, is involved in the attacks based on new and specific information developed since the attacks. At 4:06, Governor Gray Davis of California dispatches urban search and rescue teams to New York to look for bodies. At 4:10, Building 7 of the World Trade Center complex is reported on fire. At 4:20, Senator Bob Graham, chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee, says he was not surprised there was an attack, but he was surprised at the specificity. He said he was shocked at what actually happened, the extent of it. At 4:25, the American Stock Exchange, NASDAQ, and the New York Stock Exchange say they will remain closed through Wednesday. At 4:30, the president left Offutt Air Force Base in Nebraska aboard Air Force One to return to Washington. At 5:15, CNN military affairs correspondent Jamie McIntyre reports fires are still burning in part of the Pentagon, yet no death figures have been released. At 5:20, the 47-story Building 7 of the World Trade Center complex collapses. The evacuatability is damaged when the twin towers across the street collapsed earlier in the day. Other nearby buildings in the area remain ablaze. At 5:30, CNN senior White House correspondent John King reports that U.S. officials say the plane that crashed in Pennsylvania could have been headed for one of three targets: Camp David, the White House, or the U.S. Capitol building itself. At 6 o'clock, explosions are heard in Kabul, Afghanistan, hours after the terrorist attacks targeted financial and military centers in the U.S. They occurred about 2:30 a.m. local time. Afghanistan is believed to be where bin Laden, who U.S. officials say is behind Tuesday's deadly attacks, is located. But U.S. officials later say that the United States had no involvement in the incident whatsoever and credited a group fighting the Taliban in the country's ongoing civil war for those attacks. At 6:10, Mayor Giuliani urges New Yorkers to stay home Wednesday if they can. At 6:40, Secretary Rumsfeld said holding a press conference in the Pentagon, says the building's operational and on Wednesday they will be in business. At 6:54, President Bush arrives at the White House aboard Marine One and is scheduled to address the nation at 8:30 p.m. The president earlier landed at Andrews Air Force Base in Maryland with a 3-fighter jet escort, and CNN's John King reports Laura Bush arrived earlier by a motorcade from a secure location. At 7:02, CNN's Paula Zahn reports that the Marriott Hotel near the World Trade Center is on the verge of collapse and says some New York bridges are now open to outbound traffic, but not inbound. At 7:45, the New York Police Department says that at least 78 officers are missing. The city also says that as many as half of the first 400 firefighters on scene have been killed. 8:30, President Bush addresses the nation saying thousands of lives were suddenly ended by evil and asked for prayers for the family and friends of Tuesday's victims. These acts shatter steel, but they cannot dent the steel of American resolve. The president says the U.S. government will make no distinction between terrorists who committed the acts and those who harbor them. He adds that the government offices in Washington are reopening for essential personnel Tuesday and for all workers on Wednesday. At 9:22, CNN's McIntyre reports the fire at the Pentagon is still burning and considered controlled, but not contained, but not controlled. At 10 o'clock, Mayor Giuliani says New York City schools will be closed Wednesday and no more volunteers are needed for Tuesday evening's rescue efforts. He said there's hope. There are still people alive in the rubble. He also said that power's out on the west side of Manhattan and health departments show there are no airborne chemical agents to worry about. And then at 10:50, CNN reported that Attorney General Ashcroft told members of Congress that there were 3 to 5 hijackers on each plane armed only with knives. At 11 o'clock, CNN reported that New York City police believe there are people alive in the buildings near the World Trade Center. At midnight, CNN reported that a government official told them that there was an open microphone on one of the hijacked planes and that sounds of discussion and duress were heard. They also reported that says law enforcement has credible information and leads and is confident about the investigation. If you all could rise right now for the national moment of silence. There can be no doubt that the Americans have proven once again that we are courageous in the face of any adversary.
We are grateful that we can remember, that we can look back.
I say never forget. We at Nautic and the Naval Air Station couldn't do what our country and our Commander-in-Chief demands of us daily without such a supportive community like Fallon.